Thanks. Hi, everyone. I thought I could do slides today, but I thought I'd do something a little different. I'm known for trying to create more interactive experiences, so I'm going to keep my slide deck fairly short, and then I thought we could actually try playing some of the games that we have found to be valuable in organizations. Does that sound okay? Nods? Yes? Oh, yeah. Okay, let's go. So, I want to talk a little bit about communication and within lean Kanban organizations. And of course, if depending on your relationship to lean Kanban, you can abstract or generalize that to communication in other mechanisms or other organizations. We'll talk about collaboration and maybe the distinction between communication and collaboration. And then we'll try playing some games and then maybe leave a little bit of time for questions and answers, or a lot of time for questions and answers. And you can throw anything you want at me. I may not be able to answer it, but I can't imagine a question that you could throw at me that I wouldn't feel comfortable at least, making something up about. See, they warned you. So lean Kanban has lots of meetings, and most organizations have quote-unquote meetings, right? But if you look at this, and by the way, I shamelessly stole this from djaa.com. So you gotta love Google and your ability to just steal any image, borrow. But you kind of look at what's going on, and what should we build? Right? A really fundamental question: what should we build? And I think that actually is both an external and an internal answer. And an external meaning who should answer the question of what you should build. At some level, it should be your market or your customers, however you define or perceive them. Of course, what should we build is also partly based on internal forces. If you're an organization, say, building a platform for other groups within your company, your concept of customer is still an internal mechanism, and so you want to get them involved. What do we value? Right? A value is a concept deemed worthy or important, and typically we act according to a set of values. And reaching alignment on the set of things that we value is pretty important. And Kanban has a collection Lean Kanban has a collection of values that are considered to be important in terms of how it operates. An example, how do we improve our process? And there's a variation of this talk that I've been giving about some of the work that we've been doing in large distributed teams. And so, as an example, do you practice at some degree retrospectives? Right, don't you hate it when you don't have to raise your hand, but right, retrospectives, right, at a team level. But do you have this quality where retrospectives start really good and then they kind of taper off and then they kind of go away? Have you seen that quality? We see that a lot at Convenant. We see Agile or whatever teams start doing their retrospectives, and the reason that they're doing them is because humans are actually extremely efficient economic units, and we pay attention to the things that provide us value. So what we see is we see teams start doing retrospectives like, wow, this is really great, we really like this is great, and they kind of handle their crap, right? Then their crap gets handled. And then they start to go like this, and then they start bumping up on everything that's not their crap, but the organization's crap. And because the team can't seem to get past it, they stop doing it. And so we've been doing things like large distributed team retrospectives. About 2 weeks ago, we just completed a retrospective for a client that had 70 teams doing a retrospective. 70. And then we were able to download and analyze those insights about what is a team-level issue versus what is an enterprise-level issue. And notice that, one of the things I think that's a big problem with retrospectives is we do them too frequently. And by doing them too frequently, we condition ourselves to go after small change. And yet, once you're through that initial curve, the only changes that are left are substantive, bigger changes in the organization, in the enterprise, and those take time in large organizations. They're called projects. They take time to get done. And then finally, the kind of meetings that are also important are, are you meeting needs? Are you putting product into the market or opportunities for people to use your stuff that, hey Ravi, that meet needs? And for that conversation, it's both an external conversation and also an internal conversation. And I think that partly speaks to the concept that we might have around quality or value. Is the product built with an intrinsic kind of quality? And does it have an extrinsic kind of value? So lots of stuff out there. But if you look at those, most meetings are in fact collaborations in what we do as knowledge workers. And again, I'm not smart enough to take a definition, but I am smart enough to type into something, into Wikipedia and steal it. So collaboration has this notion of multiple entities working together, recursive, giving and taking of knowledge and information, but there's a goal-directed activity. Right? Now, if you tease apart some of this, right, there's a goal, right? It's creative in nature. There's mechanisms of interaction, and those things come to play in a quite important way. So what my company does is we're what we call a collaboration amplification company. And what we do is we look at the science of play and looking at things like how do we analyze data, how do we create interactive episodes to enable people to engage in some form of agility at scale. Now, why do we need this? We need this because collaboration is pretty easy in small teams. Would you kind of agree with that, right? When you can remember those days? Yeah, everyone's going, yeah, of course, it's obvious, right? Collaboration is pretty easy in small teams. Humans are optimized to collaborate in small groups. We are optimized to be about 8 to 10 people in a collaborative endeavor. Meaning, let me be more precise, we're not collaborating. You got that, right? We're not collaborating. I'm standing up here, John, and you're sitting up there kind of listening to me, maybe doing an email, checking out Twitter, that kind of thing, right? So we're not collaborating because humans do not collaborate in large groups. Anything over 8 to 10 is a broadcast model. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. We need broadcast models. But for knowledge work and the kind of work that we do in software creation and software development is we need to be collaborative. Now, I can't remember who I had this disagreement with on one of the lean Kanban things leading up to the conference, but I had this really this strong disagreement because one of the people were like, oh yeah, well, that's why we should only ever do things in small teams. Well, that doesn't work, right? Because small teams don't provide enough oomph to get big things done. Right? So I would invite people to return to the Mythical Man Month, right? Brooks in the Mythical Man Month said, I get it. Small teams are more productive, but small teams can't build OS 360. Right? So when you look at the kind of systems that are in our minds today and the kind of things we want to do at the enterprise level, they're big. So we have to find a way to structurally engage in collaboration among large units. So I'm going to start with a little design challenge to just kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I want you to find a partner, and I want you to spend about 10 minutes considering amongst yourselves, maybe not 10 minutes, about 7 minutes, just how would you attack the problem of doing an enterprise retrospective or a large distributed team retrospective. And I'm going to give you what I consider to be a moderately big team. 30 teams, 3 locations. We can reasonably assume that there's at least a 3-hour time zone difference if I've got 3 locations. And oh, by the way, you don't have enough money to fly everyone together. Got it?
Are the teams co-located
By definition, 3 locations. So 3 time zones. At least 3 time zones separate those teams.
Teams at each location or teams that are the...
Yes. Because that's the real, I mean, we could artificially create some lightweight example that doesn't represent the real world, but why don't we actually tackle something that's substantive and meaningful and actually representative of the problems that you guys are probably facing. You got 7 minutes, go. Down. Okay, team. So what did you think about that design challenge? Hard. Well, that's a good, honest answer. It's hard. Hard, why? Hard, why?
One of the big problems that we were trying to work on was how do you get, like, not just the words from people, but how do you get their feelings and emotions? Like, you know, what do they look like when you talk to them in a retrospective? Normally, you can see people are getting agitated and things like that. You're trying to, you know, maybe coordinate it this way. Like, how do you capture that kind of information?
Okay, so I'll replay it to everyone in the audience so you can hear him. You know, one of the design challenges, how do I deal with the emotional body language and cues that occur in an in-person retrospective? I got some nods here, and that can be very important, especially for those of you who play the role of a facilitator of a retrospective. Okay, great. Now, let me give you some of the common ways, and I'm going to short circuit this part of the talk because I want to spend some time on something else. Let me give you some of the strategies that we often see. So one strategy that we often see is we'll have the team do a retrospective and then roll up a representative to another level, if you will, some kind of a roll-up strategy. Agreed? Okay, roll-up strategies are very valid strategies, but they tend to break down because the representative has to represent the team, and depending on the roll-up, I'm going to have 30 people in my roll-up. And that's, again, I gave you the clue, humans don't collaborate. When you take my class in facilitation, there's a secret tattoo that you get on your head. So you look at it every day at the mirror when you get up. It's called after 8. Thank you, Ravi. After 8, no collaborate. After 8, no collaborate. So everything has to be based on that. But that's one valid model. Now, another model, and typically people are like, oh, Luke, you don't understand. We can use some cool insert collaboration technology and everyone can come together. But that's not how people work, right? And so one of the phrases I often use is you can design your work processes to support human biology, or you can design your work processes to deal with your disappointment. Because you're not going to beat human biology on this one, right? This is how humans work. So what we need to do is we need to have a mechanism whereby teams can come together at scale, right, and still produce a result that's valid for a retrospective. So far, so good? Now, I'm just using retrospectives as my way to talk. Every one of those things that we were conversing about has the same recursive structure. How many customers do you want to talk to? 8? Or would you like to talk to 80 or 800? How many people do you want engaged in your portfolio prioritization? You know, the one smart product owner? Or someone who's more informed with more insights? And how do we engage in that? And how do we build those insights? Well, it turns out that we have to have some kind of a fundamental mechanism to get there. And it turns out that games are ideal collaboration tools because games solve problems through play. Now, this definition is taken from Jane McGonigal. She's done some really great work. A game has a goal, something to be achieved. It has constraints, rules by which we are allowed to achieve the goal. It has and ways that we interact. And then finally, typically in an entertaining game, voluntary participation of which we want to have brought through at work. So when you have games with this structure, you can scale them to very large numbers of people. Every talk I give, everywhere I go, I talk about how Western democracies are broken. And if we are going to change the world, we have to start changing how we interact with our governments. And it doesn't matter if you're in America or if you're from somewhere else. We've got to find a way to engage with our governments. And we've been doing pro bono work with the city of San Jose, California now for multiple years. Nick and Ravi were part of the facilitation team this year. That's a photo of more than 100 citizens in San Jose City Hall coming together to make budget cuts in the city budget so that we can actually survive. And the picture of that is a picture of our online platform where citizens are doing the same thing. And so when you have games as a unit for helping guide your choice about scale, what you end up with is a very scalable model because we know how that model works in our brain. We know how scalable gameplay works. And we know how people kind of interact. So when we have that structure, we can leverage that. So here's my big, bold thing I'm going to try at this conference. I was wondering, should we try and play some games at scale in this room? Would that be okay? Yeah. Okay, now you have to kind of, before you just jump right in, I have to give you some warnings. For those of you who only brought your mobile devices, you're out of luck. Because the games that I've spun up for you only operate on tablets and larger laptops. So you'll have to kind of lurk on someone else. More importantly, one of the games that I brought only operates on full-fledged browsers and not a tablet. So I'll tell you which ones is which. So let me kind of walk you through it. One thing that we're releasing in collaboration with the Lean Kanban crew is Kanban Nosey. And what Kanban Nosey does is it helps a team align on values concepts deemed worthy or important that are important to them. So if you think about Kanban, and it's got a collection of kind of 9 core values that are driving that. Are you familiar with the 9 core values? Grunt once for yes, twice for no. Huh? Mike, are you familiar with those 9 values? Are you familiar with the 9 values? Yes? So there's this collection of values that are associated with Kanban. The actual mix of those values are likely to be on a per organization basis for very good reason, because different organizations are going to be subjected to different forces, both internally and externally, and the unique mix of values for that organization and their motivations for doing this new way of work are going to be different. What's important is not that they have to justify it outside, it's that they agree internally. Right? That's what's critical. They have to agree internally. Now the second thing is aligning on priorities, and we have a game called Buy a Feature. There's a list of items for sale, and you're given a limited budget. The group does not have enough money to buy all of the items. So if there's a $20 million budget, the group is typically given $8 million, or 40%, distributed evenly among the players. So if there's 8 players, each player would get $1 million. So far, so good? And then the rule of the game is simple. Buy what you want, and oh, by the way, if you don't have enough money to buy something, you have to convince other people to join you. So unlike an eBay market where it's competitive, this is a collaborative market. And what you do when you're done with the results is you can look at who negotiated with whom, what did they say, how did they convince other people to join in on producing those results. So going back to the city of San Jose, we take each individual table and we aggregate the results to see what's across the tables. And that's a very strong signal of priority. Similarly, you could do that with an internal project portfolio. Each individual group within my organization, what did that little group want? Let's aggregate that across. And you can mix and match. For example, if you're doing a product, you could say, what do my customer support people want? What do my developers want? What do my salespeople want? Analyze them and look for the priorities. Because you want to have alignment on those things that you're going to deliver for the market. Finally, there's a game called Speedboat. And it's a game that we often use for retrospectives or process improvement. Simple metaphor. I got a boat. Want it to go fast. The boat represents our process. What are the anchors that are slowing us down, and what are the propellers that are helping us go faster? Very broad, very open-ended. So far, so good? You want to give it a try? Okay, here's how it's going to work. If you want to play the Nosey Game, this will work on an iPad or a regular browser. You'll go to that URL with those game IDs. If you want to try Buy a Feature, it will work on an iPad or a regular computer, and you'll go to that URL. If you want to try the Speedboat game, you'll go to one of those 2 URLs, and that one will require, the bottom one will require a regular computer. Now, while that's going on, I'm going to be simultaneously going back and forth between the different games. So for example, here is an example of the Speedboat game. And the way it would work is people, you can drag an item on top of the board. So I could say, you know, PO doesn't attend you know, meetings. And that's an anchor that we have. Now, as this is happening, what's going to be happening is you can think of this as a real-time wiki. As people are engaging in that, they're going back and forth. So I've spun up a couple of games, and we can kind of see what's happening in these different games. While that's happening, right, I can start to look at the Nosey Game. We'll see if people are coming in on that. I can also answer questions because I'm, you know, yes, look up the URLs again, of course. I'll be quiet while people start to come in, and then I'll answer questions because I know that some of you didn't bring your laptops, which were, you know, you guys were all committed to actually paying attention, and I appreciate that. While that's happening, does anyone want to throw me a question or two? Or get ready to throw me a question or two to kind of line up? I know this is very experimental. I could have come in and just given you a whole bunch of slides, and I can do that, but I wanted to see if we could create some kind of an experience so that you could get a sense of, well, what's out there that we can use that help us engage in this action of collaboration. Got a question way in the back. Do I have a game that allows anyone to raise an issue and let anyone else address it or discuss it?
Yeah, I'm basically interested in the previous exercise.
Yeah, I would say that Speedboat is a retrospective game that allows for that. I'm cautious about saying that that you can resolve issues in a retrospective because I think it deals with the scope of control. If someone brings in an issue that I think is more of a team level scope, the team may be able to solve that issue within that retrospective. But when you start to look at some of the higher level issues or the enterprise issues, by definition, they're beyond the scope of an individual team to solve.
Sure. Well, I mean, just propose an action item.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. That's right. And you can use Speedboat in that manner for that purpose. Absolutely. But I think the trick is, Agile doesn't mean twitchy. And many in the Agile community and many in certain communities of moving faster, they get really twitchy. And what I mean by that, it's like, there's this problem, we got to solve it. And sometimes it is appropriate to take a step back and say, okay, what is truly the organizational structure or organizational issue that we're facing, and how is that going to work? So I'm cautious about, I mean, it's certainly at a team level, if you can solve the problem, do it. But at the organizational level, you might need some time to sort that out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just check in on some of these games. This is a game. This is what it looks like to see what we call the lobby. And the lobby is the waiting area. And so I see that I've got one person ready to go for this game. And so I'll start it. And now, who's ever in that game with me, which would be Lilibeth, she at least and I can start collaborating on items in terms of dragging them in. And as I start to look at what might be there, oh, I see a lot of grant access requests. Sorry. You guys are wondering why I wasn't letting you in. It was because I wasn't watching this. So in our platform, we put the facilitator in control of who is allowed to join a game. And so now all of you are in the game, and you should be able to engage in this very lightweight activity. Now, while that's going on, oh, got another access request from Brad. Hey, Brad. I can also see that there's a couple of Nosey games going on. Can I say again? Okay, what is going on in Nosey? First, notice that the Nosey game has a limit, and I didn't get to this game in time to prevent these players from joining the game. So this game is full up. If you guys switch to the game ID that's the 683 game ID, you'll be able to play. So the people who are in the game ID of 433, I think if you switch to 683, you'll be able to play. What you do in Nosey is you create a topic, and you rank order your items within that topic. The other players see if they can guess your ranking. Whoever guesses the ranking the best gets the most points and wins the game. So let's say you're playing with your son or your daughter, if you have children, and your topic was pizza toppings. I would presume that you would be able to predict your children's favorite pizza toppings better than I could. And similarly, if my kids were playing, I should be able to, if I'm paying attention, I should be able to pick my kids' pizza toppings better than yours. Right? So when we start the game, we're starting with something that's very much a social outcome. And what you do is you're going to go around the game board and you're going to invite and assess where these people are relative to a fun topic. But there's an interesting thing that happens in this game. Once we play the game on a fun topic, we're going to switch to a professional topic. And that's where the game moves from being an entertaining game to a serious game. So if I, for example, were to list my values around lean Kanban in my company, and you couldn't guess my values, and I can't guess your values, we're not in alignment on our values. Because true alignment within an organization at scale is the ability to have an accurate mental model of the other entities within that organization. And that's what we're trying to discern in this kind of an activity. What is the mental model? And how do I build alignment around the mental model? Not about what I know, about what I assume to be true about someone else. When I work with Bill, what is my mental model of Bill? Because that's going to inform how I behave. And that's a really fundamental structural unit. You know, Agile people, or even other people in our communities, we all talk about the importance of teamwork, but we often don't really, and I'm starting to see the results of the game. So we've got a few people finished and a few people finishing up, and we can see the results in a second. But most people actually don't know what makes a team in our community of software people. What makes a team is something called a shared transactional memory system. And a shared transactional memory system means I've worked with you long enough so that I know when we're in the meeting and we're planning our work, you're kind of the risk guy. And you're thinking about what's going to go wrong. And Bill is kind of the idea guy. He's thinking what we can do. And I'm going to think about, you know, do we have the right infrastructure for our team to be successful? Right? And those expectations about how we work as a team form over time and are what make a team a team. And that's what we want to celebrate in these approaches as opposed to be worried about. So we're kind of cranking on. We're almost done with this game. I see that there's a few more to go. Let's see. We've got a couple of guesses to make. Let's check the other game. Great. If I go over here, I've got one activity on my PO. I'm seeing a few anchors with Lilibeth's team, but I'm not seeing too many anchors in this game. So this game has players. So Brad and Javier and Ming, what you might want to consider doing is dragging some anchors in there, and that would give you kind of the feeling of how this game works. Now in this game, Speedboat, we're just looking at the various anchors in the team. I'll tell you a story about my favorite anchor of all time in doing a large distributed team retrospective. We call it the Pepsi anchor. One team member dragged over Pepsi as an anchor. And of course, we asked, why is Pepsi an anchor? And it was this very emotional response. And it went something like, yeah, I work at this startup and all they buy is Diet Coke. And they think that every developer drinks Diet Coke and that's all we ever drink. And that's not true. If they really wanted me to be more productive and remove the anchors, they would buy Pepsi. Because they treat us differently when we drink Pepsi. So I'm not making this up. This was a very, what? He's laughing? Oh, do we have a result on the Nosey game? Yeah? So this is an example of the results of Nosey, and I know it's an eye chart right now, but what this shows is the choices that each person made, and the winner of this game, the person who knew the other players the best, was Niraj. Now in this game, we can see that Niraj's, and I'm assuming he answered truthfully, or she answered truthfully, is Cabernet Franc is your favorite wine. Is Niraj, where are you? Is that true? Is Cabernet Franc your favorite wine? Oh, you just did a random. Okay. But now watch what happens this time around. I'm going to keep the same players, right? And this time I invite you to play vigorously. And what I mean by vigorously is play the game as if these items really do matter. What are your number one elements and core practices? What is your top value? Because, and by the way, there's a phrase in the gaming community that is often goes, to play the game, we need to play a game. And you know how when you buy a game, you rip it open, and you just start playing around, and then you read the rules? Right? Yeah. So this is what happened in the first version of it. He's like, yeah, I just did some stuff. But eventually, what's going to happen is teams are going to play this game for real or seriously, because a serious game produces an outcome that materially affects the players. So for example, if I were to simulate the use of the San Jose budget games with the people in this room, it wouldn't have any emotional impact on you because you don't live in San Jose. But when you are playing the game in San Jose with citizens of San Jose and they're making budget choices of should we fund the Children's Health Initiative, the police helicopter program, or more library hours, those people play really intensely, right, Mick? Because that outcome matters to them. Similarly, when you are working in a lean Kanban way and you are looking at the prioritization of your portfolio, those people who want you to build them stuff will play very vigorously because they know that the outcome of that game will represent the things that you're going to build. I'll give you another example in which we find the games to be very effective. Right now, we all have various relationships with the concept of technical debt. Agreed? Right? So if you think about it, the business people are over here, and they know that they want to manage technical debt, but they're not capable of making a choice. So the only thing that a business person can do about technical debt is allocate a certain portion of resource to fix it. That's the best you can get. So far, so good? Well, what technical debt should we actually go fix? The current model in most organizations that I see is the architects pick. Why? Because the architects are smart. That's true. They're architects. They're smart. But they may not feel the pain of technical debt that the developers feel. So why not take the resource allocated by the business, identify a set of technical debt improvements, and turn that over in a buy a feature game to the actual developers. Put them in charge of their own system improvements. The results are astonishing. Now, the choices of what to pick can still be done by the architects who create some insights and guidelines, but the actual implementation choices can then be made by the developers. And that creates a very compelling and very powerful way of working. Okay, now we see what these people are picking, and we can see that they're going after things like core practices and values and things like that. Over on the Speedboat side, let's see what we got, if anything. Okay, now we're starting to see some anchors and some propellers. And normally this game would be obviously actively facilitated by someone. And what we then do is we take each game's result as an individual unit, download them, and look for the patterns. And that's where you get the benefit of a large distributed team retrospective. And I think that this is the aspect of the community, right, that we need to solve as we get bigger. And I don't know if the right word is scale or, get bigger, but some of the problems that we want to tackle in organizations, right, when Agile started, it was pretty small, and it's grown up, right, and Lean has grown up as part of that. So now we have these bigger organizations working with more people. We've got to find ways to engage them at scale. Any other questions? I've got my friend in the far corner threw me a question that was pretty cool. Any other questions going on? Mike?
It was actually an observation rather than a question. Just to note that there's some decoys.
There's some decoys.
Yes, in the values and principles practices in the Kanban game. And I've noticed that some people are choosing them. It's interesting.
Yeah, and so part of what's going on with the Kanban Nosey game is that that's a licensed offering from the LKU, and that's going to give them an opportunity to look at what the community is choosing. Right? What are we choosing as a community, and what are important? And are the decoys like that maybe not something so good? Right? Okay, any other questions or comments before I move on? Because I want to make sure that we've had a taste of this, but I also want to honor the time, because we've got a lot of time, and I want to, yeah, it's 4:15. I've got till 5, so we got plenty of time. So far, so good? Questions? You guys are intermixing play. They're very intent over there. They're going to win. Yeah, let's go look at the second Nosey Game. You bet. Oh, you want to reset it? Sure. We'll move it forward. And this takes the results as done so far. So according to this, Brad won with a 302, and you can start to see the choices that people make and the pattern of the choices. I know it's an eye chart and it's hard to read. On the screens of that game, you can see what's going on. And again, what I can do as the host is I can start again with the players that were there and then look at the different kind of options for values and things like that. And we're seeing various aspects of this game just kind of play out. We see Michelle and Nayan, GPAB, I don't have my glasses on, apologies. Krishna, Mike is near done. And you start to see also that the game kind of slows down as it becomes more thoughtful. And then you're starting to see how people really interact about what are these values and how are these important. Now, I'm going to submit to the people in the room that at scale, you can't process orient your team to success because it's too hard to have the individual autonomous units that represent your team operate consistently. But what you can do is give them a set of values and ways to behave that allow them to work in alignment. And that's a different set of concepts than forcing them to work in exactly the same kind of rigid set of rules. So we're almost done. Nick, you better pick it up. Now in this game, Carlos is an anchor. Who knew? The problem of our team has been solved. It's Carlos slowing us down. Yes, Ravi. Okay. Inside joke. So we can start to see what's going on. Now, we've got clear skies and new propeller and top wind speed. In some of the actual retrospectives we've done with teams, we've seen things like a propeller might be, adequate testing infrastructure or test gear. It's often very hard for you often see organizations invest a lot in automated testing, but then they may not have the gear for the data associated with testing. So their data side falls down. And so we've looked at patterns of, do I have the gear for the data? Do I have the necessary volume and structure of data? And so forth. Okay. Now, in this game, you'd start to see the notion of, say, values, and I can move someone up to the top. And this is where we can start to have a much more interesting conversation in the team. Wow, your number one value was respect, and yet I see a different member of the team having a value of courage, leadership, incrementalism, balance, and flow. Respect wasn't on this person's list, and it's not about right or wrong. It's about having an understanding about what we mean by the choices in the language we use so that we can identify how we can come together as a group. So again, I've got values. Here, the number one value from Michelle was flow and transparency, and then respect. And so I'd want to know, I'm not expecting that there's strong degrees of alignment from people who just come together at a conference. But within an organization, if we don't have strong degrees of alignment, I want to know how we can build that, how we can come together as a group that agrees this is how we're going to behave. Because at scale, when an organization agrees to a certain set of decision-making frameworks, a certain set of values, we work better. I'll give you a concrete one. The largest distributed team I managed was when I was vice president of engineering and product management for an Israeli company called Aladdin Knowledge Systems. Remember those software security dongles that you used to use? Some people might remember them. Anti-piracy stuff. I managed that team. So I had 2 teams in Tel Aviv, 1 in Munich, 1 in Portland, 1 here in Santa Clara, and I had to have a way for them to operate the same. So there were a set of coding values, there was a set of system values, and then we had our corporate values. And we worked hard to build alignment on those values so that we knew that all of the developers around the world were operating congruently in the code base the same way. We valued the same thing. We operated according to those values. And this is an opportunity when you're looking at a tool like this to have a team talk about core practices. Now let's switch up core practices. Right here we've got a core practice of visualize, but notice here Krishna also has a core practice of visualize. Already we're seeing certain kinds of alignment within the players of the game, even if we wouldn't necessarily have expected that. So far, so good? Yes? Okay. I'm going to switch back to PowerPoint and then leave a lot of time for questions and answers. I want to talk a little bit more about mental models. And this goes back into really talking about Kanban Nosey. Mental models really are just our expectations of others. Not just of ourselves, but of others. So, what do I expect to be the roles, the processes, the artifacts, the values, the work flows, work practices of a different group? How do I expect them to work? And now, what's really important is if you're a product manager and you're working with a team, you not only have an expectation and a mental model of the team, but you have a mental model and expectation of each person in the team. So living in the Bay Area, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Bay Area, we have a hockey team who likes to break our heart every year. They're called the San Jose Sharks. And the San Jose Sharks as a team are awesome during the regular season, and then they just like get to the playoffs and want to break our heart. Agreed? For those in the Bay Area? Or is that just me? Anyone else? Masa's got a hand raised. So I have a mental model of how the Sharks behave as a team, and I also have a mental model of how the individual players behave in certain situations as I watch them. Similarly, we have that same mental model of other people at work, and so does the dev team of others. Again, going back to what Nosey does is it's trying to elicit those mental models. Because when we're in alignment, right, internal alignment would be people in the same role or in the same group rank their items the same. I always use the example of pizza toppings. Let's say that Nick and I don't know each other. We do because I used his name. But Nick and I don't know each other. And I say, Nick, let's play Nosey and you rank your favorite pizza toppings and I'll rank my favorite pizza toppings. And Nick goes, great. Mine is pepperoni and I rank pepperoni. I'm like, wow, we are internally aligned. We have the same ranking. External alignment is my ability to predict others. And that's what we need to understand the mental model and build high-performing teams. And that's what we want. Because a high-performing team has clarity, not written on a wall, but in your head about how their others behave. And that's what we want to get scale. Right? So this talk is about scale. This talk isn't about, hey, I've got 2 teams, how do we make them improve? You can handle 2 teams improving, put them in the room and have them talk it out. What about 30 teams? What about 50 teams? What about 80 teams? What about 120 teams? What about 3,500 developers working on a financial services system or a financial claim system? That's the kind of thing that we're now trying to tackle, and that's where we need to have these kinds of tools. So I have allocated purposefully about a half hour for open-ended discussion. We can do one of 2 things. You can honor the law of 2 feet. I call it the law of 2 fists at the end of the conference. Or you can throw me questions, or you can ask me to talk about other stuff. You get the gold star so far of some of the questions, gold star, thumbs up. But I'm here to serve you for the rest of the time and either answer questions or give you insights or let you know some of the stuff that we've done that may be relevant to you. Oh, you've got mics. Thank you so much. Man, I like it when the AV guys are totally on board. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so you would facilitate this online, say that you had distributed team and everybody kind of logged in and you did it, but then you're saying you would facilitate it. But it seems like there's still a lot of qualitative information you're going to get, you know, from the group. And then I'm still trying to understand now how you scale that up.
So there's two elements of scale that we're talking about. One is the actual individual units. So when we do, are you referring to Speedboat or Nosey? Doesn't matter? Okay, so for Nosey, I'm sorry, let me switch to Speedboat.
I could see it more with Speedboat, how you could take them, but the Nosey seems kind of, that's one's less clear.
Right, so for both, let's start with Speedboat. So with Speedboat, we typically do assign a facilitator to each group. And there's two ways to go about that. You can either train your internal facilitation team, or there's a network of more than 3,000 facilitators around the world that are available and at service to do this kind of work. So each one of those people facilitate, and then what we do is we download the data and we code it. And we code those anchors and propellers according to people, process, and technology, very standard framework, and we code it based on scope of control. So if it's an anchor, we look at what we think is the perceived scope of control. Should the team handle it? Should the business unit handle it? Or should truly the enterprise handle it? And so that coding does happen as a post-processing step. And depending on the volume of data, that post-processing can take anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. Right? But again, I'm not asking you to, look at, and I hope I hope I'm not offending anyone when I talk agile as opposed to lean, Kanban, because I'm not always good at the distinctions. I'm not an expert in all of these areas. But when you look at, for example, the true Agile manifesto, it never said run a retrospective every sprint. Right? Just like I don't think anywhere in any formal lean Kanban formalism, it says the moment you get an item into the column, run a retrospective. That's not what it says. So I think part of the issue that we've developed amongst ourselves about retrospectives is we run them too frequently, because when you get to that really big issue, it's going to take you a few months to solve it. So that's why I don't have a problem with saying these enterprise retrospectives are between 1 and 3 weeks of planning, 1 week to acquire the data, 1 to 3 weeks of post-processing, and then a project that's going to, just rule of thumb it, to take a quarter. Right? I'll give you a really concrete example from our consulting practice. Rackspace came to me and said, we want to improve our process, and part of a transformation. We did a large distributed team retrospective, and it was a really clear quote. One of the gentlemen said, I was acquired by Rackspace and my company, and Rackspace is a company that's grown through acquisition. And he said, if you ask me for my performance, my team is doing great. But there's 9 source code repositories across 5 source code systems. As a group, we're sub-optimized. My team, fine. Now, it took months of concerted project effort by the Rackspace organization to get to a unified source code management system. Because that stuff you can't do trivially, because too much can go wrong. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And again, I know we want to move fast, but we don't want to move frenetically. And we got to understand that large organizations have a certain structure for a reason, and we want to operate, we want to push that, but we can't break that. So does that help? Now, with Nosey, again, you're going to have a host, but the hosts are distributed and the data comes into a common repository for then analysis. Dude. Mike, I'm going to go with him. Is that okay?
So it looks like these are great tools for for information gathering and analysis, right? And also getting alignment, getting feedback efficiently, all those things. So if at the time that you need to make decisions, do you then use the
prioritization game? Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But you still do it in a game? Or
yes.
What about?
So we still do prioritization in a game. I didn't show that one on the screen, but we still do prioritization in a buy a feature game, and the results of those prioritization choices feed into the actual execution plan.
Okay.
So if you've got 17 ideas, you're going to use by a feature to prioritize it, or by a project, prioritize it into the top 3 or 4 that matter.
But it's more of a voting kind of system, right? What is the discussion part?
Well, the discussion would be about what those choices are. So let me see if I can illustrate what the results of that might look like. So I'm going to look at a game that we built for Nike Corporate Social Responsibility. And these are a few tests that we've done. Just so you can see, now this game isn't a live game. We went to the Nike website, we grabbed their corporate social responsibility projects. So here would be what the projects look like. Let me just zoom that up. So these are the programs that you could get, and I apologize that these are a little small, but you can see one item is continuous energy improvement, renewable energy, LEED, water usage, and they have different costs, and the costs are reflective of how hard those projects are. In the games that I selected, these were the priorities of the 2 games, the items that were purchased. And the way the games look, and this is what the game board looks like, you can start to see what the choices were among the players and the chat logs and things like that. So this is where you would use this kind of a technique at scale to drive decision making on project selection. And now, if I'm doing a distributed team retrospective, the projects may be so obvious I don't need this, or the projects need to go through this. If I'm working on the values side, it's not a question of prioritization, it's a question of alignment. And that alignment is going to happen through a conversation. Lamar, what did you mean when you used the word transparency? Because I'm putting the Kanban boards on the wall. It seems completely transparent to me. And Lamar goes, okay, listen, Luke, this other thing that we're doing about quality is completely hidden. And it's not being reflected on the board, and I think it's not honoring the values that we've agreed to. Oh, hey, dude, you're right. I didn't think about that. We should probably find a way to solve that. So more often than not, when you're using the Kanban Nosey application, it's about identifying a way to have a conversation on the values, and then how are you operating congruently with those values? Are we operating congruently with transparency? And Lamar might say, no, we're not. We need to do this. Okay.
Sorry, Luke, can I jump in? So I'm actually using it in 2 ways. I'm going to run it again in my workshop tomorrow after we've done a paper exercise, so that you'll have a chance to listen to the people on your table before you do the game, so you're not just guessing like I was today. And that's partly about, how well do you know your colleagues. But you've got to remember that values also stand for things that we can do as well as things that we like. And you can then prioritize those, and you can do Nosey or other ranking exercises based on what do we need to pay attention to in the organization, and that's kind of a prioritization discussion, but it's not quite as concrete as a typical project discussion. But I'm tomorrow framing that as part of it's just part of a process, and a fun part of the process. Yeah.
We hope. There was a question over here, sir.
Yes, on the problem of alignment, you have 20 of your 30 teams that are discussing. You discover that 20 of them are out of alignment. First of all, how do you define alignment? You have 6 characteristics. If you hit 3 common, then good.
So Louise is asking for everyone. I think the heart of the toughest question you could possibly ask about the concept of alignment. And what he said, and just so everyone could hear it, or at least what I heard, not necessarily what you said, but what I heard was, I've got 30 teams, I do 20 enter alignment, 10 aren't, and there's differences, what do I do? That's where I think you have conversations. That's where I think you have agreement at a governance or a leadership level where an organization can truly say, here are our values. And that happens, I think, from a design perspective, from a small number of resonant minds. A few months ago, I was hired by Yahoo, and they asked me to work with them on their 3,500 person advertising and data team. Like, how do we improve our processes? At that scale, you don't improve processes per se without an alignment on values. So what we did was we met with the top architects of Yahoo, and we identified their coding and system values. Coding and system values. And now if you go to Yahoo, they decided to express those values through little what they called ninjineers. Because ninjineers have codes of honor. And they have little posters now, well, not posters, little posters, but they have posters all over the Yahoo campus about here are our ninjineering code of honor and code of ethics, and here's how we behave as ninjineers. Now the trick is there's 5 coding values and 4 system values, because values must be very small, 5 or less, to be really resonant with a large number of people. But once I have them, I can operate according to them. So it takes time. It's going to, I'm not asking you, let lesser people do lesser things. If you're in this room, I'm asking you to do the hard stuff, right? And it's going to take time. Is that on?
Is it? Oh, yeah. So maybe you just answered this, but developing the list. So I'm assuming you may go through several iterations. If you're trying to discover what the actual values are in a group, you wouldn't give them a preset. Or well, the virtue, I think, of something like Kanban, Nosey, is that the Kanban leadership community has defined a set of values that are appropriate for Kanban that you can then use and adapt and adopt, right? You may choose for your own internal culture to drop one of the Kanban ones and insert your own, which would be great. Or you might phrase it your own way, right? Express it your own way. But I think that starting with a list is very, very effective. Typically, if you're in a large organization, you're going to have wisdom, and you want to tap into that wisdom about how people have behaved in the past. And so it sounds onerous, but it's not. It's really just about structuring a certain set of conversations to allow that to occur. Masa.
Hi. So I want to just jump in a little bit because I have actually been using innovation games for a while. And I want to give you an example as to the different ways in which this can be used. So something that I have been doing quite a bit is I do, for example, enterprise assessments or organizational assessments using innovation games. And very recently, and actually I had a follow-up call this morning with a large telecom, for which we did an assessment that included internal customers, technical teams, leadership, and providers. And the kind of information that we gathered was such that you get data, for example, like provider says, we are very effective because we work really hard, we are very committed. However, the customers say the value we're getting is very low, whereas the executive team is saying we are very customer focused. So what this is showing is a very interesting disalignment in terms of the appreciation. So on the one hand, the executive team says, we are totally customer oriented. We make sure that we deliver value. Well, you might believe that that's what you're doing, but the customer is not receiving it. And at the same time, the providers say we're working really hard, so we are very effective. And what this means is, yes, we believe you work hard, but that doesn't mean that the value is being created, which means the quality of the work is not there. So the first tier of alignment is for everybody to agree that the value is not being delivered as it should, and that working hard doesn't mean being effective. So then that changed the behavior, and that changed the way the appreciation is from the executives towards customers, and then for providers to realize that they need to really understand what the customer is asking for to be able to deliver it without having to work as hard. And the result is they work less hard and deliver better value. So.
Another question?
Do you want to respond or add?
No. I just think that there's many dimensions of value, and it's a very slippery concept, right? And part of the problem with measuring value in software is software is inherently configurable and malleable. And so one of the challenges that we have in the software field as a larger field is that the hardware community can measure value through techniques that are very suspect in the software community. And what I mean by that is, if I'm manufacturing physical goods, I can use techniques like conjoint analysis to identify very clearly price points and value. My favorite example of a goofy conjoint analysis result that's actually true is Emerson makes a brand called Incinerator. They're garbage disposal units. Are you familiar with the brand? Okay. You want to know what made the Incinerator garbage disposal unit more valuable to a significant number in the market? The fact that you could get them in different colors. Now think about that just a little bit. It goes into your sink. But people were actually provably willing to pay more money for something. Now the trick is that when you buy it, it doesn't change, whereas of course with software it changes. And so the notion of the concept of value is very tricky in software because it's a moving target that's configurable in and of itself. And so when we start to talk about value, it's a little bit harder in the pure software world, and we should always be cognizant of that.
Hey, so for the retrospective itself, just to make sure I understand this right, for the 30 teams, let's say, will we have each team using the Speedboat?
Each team plays their own Speedboat game.
Okay, and then there's an analysis that puts it together.
We download all the results. Now I have it, and then I think you guys are kind of asking really good questions about this, so let me see if I can show you an example visually of what this might look like. This is an example of a scatter plot of a recent distributed team retrospective that we did. Pod is this organization's term for a collection of products in a business unit. So what we would call business unit, they call pod. So their structure is team. Many teams work on one product. Many products are in one pod. And the enterprise is 3 business units. So far, so good? And then the coding of people, process, and technology. And what we found was that the teams identified positive and feedback relatively evenly about each other, but there were significant opportunities for improvement at the enterprise level, which is kind of what we suspected because the organization was in that curve of the teams couldn't really fix any more of the problems. And then if I counted them, or I position them as a count, you can see for this organization, there are some issues about really bad things by positioning of the anchor in the really bad region about process and technology, and mostly at the enterprise level. So that's the kind of analysis that you would do outside of across all of the games, as opposed to just in one game. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and then like who picks the action items that come out of it? Who picks the changes that come out of that?
Well, okay, you're going to create a list of projects, and some of those projects are team and some of those are enterprise. What we would recommend is the management reviews the results because ultimately someone is writing a check. Would you agree with that? Someone is up, some person with a title of V&P or C&T&O is writing some kind of a check. And so you want them involved in making that selection. Now, some projects may just be approved. Going back to Rackspace, the leader at Rackspace at the time was a guy named Mark Inarani, a very brilliant technologist. When we presented the results to him, he just went, oh, this is completely obvious. We got to get them on the same source code control system. What do we need to do that? I mean, he was a trivial sale, right? It's just you presented the data and he's like, okay, this one, go, right? And then we have additional games such as by a feature if you need that list. But I think when you get the compelling data, you know, I use this when I teach product managers product management. There's hollow language and concrete language, right? Product managers or product owners have hollow language when you ask them why the backlog is prioritized a certain way and they say, because I said so. Well, that's really motivational. Whoa, can't wait to build because you said so. Hold me back. But when a product manager or a product owner says, well, that's a good question, Louise. Let me tell you what the research we did. And let me tell you the customer feedback. And let me tell you how I analyzed it. And this is what we're going to do. Okay, so when you get this kind of feedback, I don't want to make it sound like it's really hard to make these choices because with data comes power, right? Barksdale has a great quote, as long as we're using opinions, we might as well use mine. I use that with my team, right? As long as we're using opinions, use mine. I'm the CEO. So I don't want you to think that when you get at this scale that these decisions suddenly become harder. At scale, these decisions become easier. The spend is harder. You mean I've got to invest, you know, $190,000 in new test equipment to get big data for my teams? Wasn't really expecting that in my budget. But the motivation is actually easier at scale, not harder. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
On the topic of value, you were talking, mentioning it's kind of difficult to pinpoint what value is. When he was referring to it, he had the customer right there. So in that instance, the customer could tell you right away.
Absolutely. Yeah. In that instance, the customer can, in fact, tell you value, and it's much easier.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to.
Right. Okay. I'm going to give you 15. We got 15 minutes. We can either ask another question, I can let you go get a beer or a home or a hotel or whatever is enjoyable. I want to serve you. This is your call.
As David said this morning, I have got the mic, so I'll ask a question.
No?
So who is it that you would normally... It's a question I don't expect you necessarily to have a succinct answer to, and you can say, let's talk about it after.
Like I have a succinct answer to anything?
This could be really hard. If there's, I guess it's a two-part question. One is who in an organization would you need to be speaking with in order to be able to get past initial skepticism, resistance, or whatever, and so that you can actually be effective. You don't want to be operating too low in the organization, and you probably, I'm guessing, would need to be operating pretty high. And I guess somewhat symbiotically with that situation is, what's the condition of the organization? What are some preconditions for you to be able to go in knowing you're going to be effective? And there's some organizations I can think of, a few of them have left the room, where they've got some deep-seated issues where this could be threatening to expose, and leadership wants it, and staff might not, or middle management knows it needs to be done, and leadership's against it. Those are the kind of scenarios that I think are pretty common in transformation situations, and I see the innovation games as a kind of an icebreaker, not in the party sense, but in the Arctic sense.
Right, like an icebreaker ship that's going to really cram the ice. It does. I think the first, so if I recall, the first question is, at what level of an organization do we need to operate at? My experience has been that there's a relatively strong global grassroots movement around innovation games. And I don't want everyone in this room, I don't want anyone in this room to think this was like a massive pitch, because it wasn't. All of the games that you saw online have in-person variations and in-person versions of these, and you can go get those for free and do these things for free. There's no like, that's not my style, right? But I don't know of a way to scale other than going digital, right? And I think it's important to talk about these tools. So in terms of the organization, there's been a couple of instances where the grassroots was then bubbled up, and some leader said, what the heck are y'all doing with these boats and trees and things on the wall? And then they've said, oh, well, could we do it at scale? And then they kind of discovered the ability to go at scale. And the other is, I don't see this, by the way, in the lean Kanban community, but there is this kind of semi-undercurrent in the Scrum community about management is evil, and it's command and control, and it's bad. And I don't like that undercurrent. I don't think it's a healthy undercurrent, because I think, managers are people too. Shock. Oh, come on. She's like, right? She cracked her rib. She's laughing so hard. They're just under different kinds of pressures, and they have different kinds of responsibilities. But I do think that they're open to certain kinds of change, and they're also afraid of change. Not unlike developers. Someone wrote on the Ignite board, I'm a developer and I don't want to collaborate. Well, okay, that happens at the developer level. So I think that in general, the leaders that I have been fortunate to work with could be also a self-selecting set, but I think they're open to the possibility that at some fundamental level to improve their organization, they have to make these kinds of changes, and they're looking for tools and ways to do that. I think the other question you asked, so that deals with the scope and the level. I think the other question you asked was about
well, I think there's, you actually touched on it with your previous answer, and what the key sounds like, and I'm not terribly surprised, is that the key leaders need to be open to the possibility of ...
That's right. You just have to be open to now I do think that leaders have to have the ability to actually lead, and there's evidence and research from, let me open up a different thing. I'll give you an example of a project we did at VeriSign, right? Let's see here for a sec. So here's an example, a live data of a project we did for VeriSign. They had 46 projects, 120 employees, 5 locations around the world. And when we have more items that can fit into a single game, have you ever been in the meeting where someone throws up the spreadsheet of like 60 items and says, let's prioritize it? And you just go, bleh, right? And the reason you go, bleh, is because you've blown cognitive ability. So what we do with large portfolios is we do what we do in the Olympics. We take 20 of them and move them forward in a tournament, right? So this was a tournament structure, 15, 15, and 16 projects. The winners advance, right? So now it's not the people competing, it's the best projects competing against the other projects. So we did this, and before we started, we went to the leadership team and we said, what project do you think is a dead ringer that all your organization is going to buy? It was way out there. Not a single team in any of the tournaments bought the project. And so the leadership team came to me and said, what do we do? And I said, well, what do you think you should do? Do you think you need to do this project? Oh, yes, it's part of our corporate strategy. Well, then do it. But now you have absolute evidence that no one in your entire organization in 5 locations around the world knows why it's important or why you should do it. Now, the other projects that were chosen were just fine the way they were. But the team at VeriSign estimated that they saved 3 months of implementation. Now think about this. 3 months of implementation because they were more aligned. Not because they had better requirements. Because they had engaged and involved their distributed team. We saw this, there's a company, bwin.party. It's not very well known in America. In Europe, it's one of the largest real money gambling companies. This was a team where what we did here was we took the leadership team and we had them play 2 games, and then we took the extended leadership team and we played a different set of games. Now notice down here, this result at the very bottom. The leadership team was 0 for 2, and the extended leadership team was 4 for 4. And we brought this information back to the leadership team and we said, according to what the chat logs and other things are saying, your leadership, your extended leadership team thinks that that innovation project is really critical to the company. Are you sure you don't want to do it? And the leadership team took that data in and said, you know, we're going to go ahead and do that. And what's more important, and I'll give you this as my last insight, and then maybe we call it a day. One of the things I absolutely hate is when people who are outside a company look inside a company and say, oh, they don't collaborate. They're fighting each other. Well, that's total crap. Just because I'm working in a business unit and I'm optimizing my behavior for a business unit doesn't mean I hate my other business units. It means I'm optimizing the behavior for my business unit. I'm not anti your business unit. I just work over here. You work over there. Cool. I'm going to work hard here. Right? So what happens is when we do these games, we mix people up. And you get stuff like this, and this is an actual chat log from bwin Party. bwin Party has 3 business units: sports, poker, and casino gaming. So real-time sports book. Look at what Katrina says. I think sports needs the attention. Interesting. Marcus, following up on Harold's proposal to focus on one sports mobile initiative. Katrina, they are making a lot of money for the company, and I don't work on sports. You put her in an environment where you say, buy the projects that are best for the company, and guess what? She did. We didn't put her in an environment that said, buy the best projects for your business unit. We put her in a context that said, buy the best projects for the company. And we tell them very clearly, there's this number of projects. You don't know which projects are associated with which unit. They're randomly selected. So just pick the best that you can in this game. And that creates incredible alignment about the results.